Hello everyone, welcome to What If Hollow Knight Found the Origin of the Sandwich Movie. Before we start, please go support Subaru9 for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made, there will be some mistaken characters' gender. A story from the Hallownest Tales saga. This short story serves to clarify the origin of the character of Sandwich, his connections to the Grimm Company, and his role in the story. The Tale in the Rain. A soft cushion, silk sheets and a plush toy, everything was ready to welcome the new member of the company. As always, Brum had done an impeccable job. Of course, he did not expect his master to thank him, he never did, but the satisfaction of having done a good job was enough pay. Anyway, this was not a particularly pleasant task, considering the fate of the poor creature they would have to raise. The door to the room swung open, and there on the threshold, enveloped in darkness, was the bat with a bundle in his arms. He looked devastated. It had been the same the other times. He knew that in a few hours he would find him drunk in a corner, crying out of guilt and pain for having taken his offspring from a mother. But tonight something was different, her despair was worse than usual, she sank to the floor and clutched the bundle to her chest as she trembled. "Teacher? What?" "The girl," he whispered. "What?" "It's a girl." The shattered bat cried. "The hatchling is a girl, she won't survive. Females are much less likely to survive the ritual than males, all her siblings perished, she won't make it." "Calm down, master, you can't decide it's the end so soon, he's just been born." "Forgive me, little one," Grimm sobbed. "Forgive me for condemning you, I'm sorry." A pair of scarlet eyes flashed. A small white moth woke with a start, the hairs on its body standing up, making it look fluffier than usual. It took a few minutes for it to calm down and remember where it was and accept that it had all been a dream, or failing that, a vision from the past. Lately, it had been having a lot of visions, some future and some past. It was a bit difficult for it to control them and keep a cool head. It hadn't been seeing very good things. Knowing he wouldn't be able to sleep again, he decided to get up and stretch his legs a bit. He left the room he shared with his traveling companions, being very careful not to wake them. They had been through quite a few emotions in the last few days, and they were definitely exhausted. He assumed he was the only person awake at that moment, but to his surprise, another soul wandered in the shadows of the ruins. A huge butterfly with beautiful blue wings, dressed in rags that obscured its face, only two glowing eyes standing out in the darkness. "Aerith, are you awake at this hour?" "Yes, I don't really need that much sleep and I was a little nervous, the sound of falling water calms me." "Well, of course, there's plenty of water here, you can hear it splashing everywhere." "And what are you doing awake?" "I had a nightmare or something." "Are you okay?" "Of course. I'm not a scaredy cat grub anymore who needs a hug every time I have a bad dream." He stood as high as his little legs would allow, trying to look more imposing, although given his small size he only seemed adorable, but of course Dareth would never mention it, he knew it would offend him. Instead he answered with a simple "I'm glad," and they both remained silent, listening to the running water. They were both recent companions, brought together by adversity under strange circumstances, and in the short time they had been together, they had learned to trust each other, supporting each other to survive all the dangers and beasts they had had to face in recent days. However, although there was trust, the reality was that they didn't know much about each other. The little one had never talked much about himself. Dareth, of course, being as respectful as he was, never asked anything. But tonight, with the intimate atmosphere that had been created, something drove him to cross the imaginary barrier that surrounded the bug of mystery and silence. He longed to discover the moth's secrets, starting with the most obvious of all. "Hey Sandwich, I hope you don't mind my question, but why did they call you like that?" "Huh? I think I mentioned it, my teacher intended to eat me, and that's why he called me Snack, but then he regretted it." "And what made him regret it?" "I mean, it's not very common for a predator to give up on its prey. It was your daughter who fell in love with me, that girl, I owe her my life, that's why I'm trying to save her." "Do you have a mission? Is that what you're looking for in this dead kingdom?" "Well." He looked at the butterfly, its eyes fixed on his, as blue and bright as its wings, oozing curiosity, but also innocence. He had always been someone trustworthy, the kind of helpful person who was always willing to help. Perhaps it wouldn't be a problem if he told it a little about his past. The truth is, it's a rather long story. "Oh, well, I don't mind, I'm always willing to hear a good story." He settled down on a rock, ready for his tale to begin. "Well, since Sandwich also proceeded to sit on a nearby rock, this story begins in a very, very far away place. I don't know who my parents were, I never met them, I just know that from the beginning I was always alone, at the mercy of all the wild predators that were in the area where I lived. Fortunately there were also many plants where I could hide, something of vital importance to me, since I was a larva I have this white color, and that stood out a lot in a green field. I think it was a miracle or the will of some god that no one ate me, but obviously my luck wasn't going to last forever." One day someone found me, a kind of headed insect floating around with a torch in one hand and a bucket in the other, where he put any small bug that looked tasty. I fell into that category, so I ended up being captured like the others. And well, the story of my life would have been very short if it weren't for a series of somewhat strange and unexpected situations, the first of which was the fact that the place I ended up in was none other than a circus, and the leader of this circus was someone quite special. He was a bat. Yes. Just like you heard. He was a glamorous and elegant guy. He walked gracefully and spoke with class. Just seeing him was a spectacle, and he aroused the admiration of both males and females. Oh, what a charming creature. Although what many didn't know was that in the privacy of his home, behind the scenes, he was a bad-tempered wretch. The day I arrived at the circus, he was having one of his tantrums because he couldn't find his eyeliner. Where's my eyeliner? On your nightstand, master, answered the person in question. It's not here. Brum glanced at the piece of furniture. And that one? That's jet black, the one I need is smoky black or failing that, black number 3. What? Ah. Always the same, your ignorance offends me. Sorry. Ignorance, lack of class. No aesthetic sense. What sin of mine deserves such condemnation? He threw himself down into an armchair with excessive drama. The perfection of my face sullied by an incompatible hue. Okay. We'll help you find your pencil. Brum always suffered putting up with the master's tantrums, even though he had a fairly high rank no one really envied his position, putting up with Grimm was never easy. My arrival at the circus coincided with the exaggerated drama that the maestro was creating inside. As soon as my captor set foot in the tent, they immediately grabbed him by the arm to force him to look for the damn pencil, and well, there I was, trapped inside a bucket awaiting my fate as a sandwich. And it was during this agonizing wait that an angel appeared to me, a sweet black creature with a white face, a charming little girl full of innocence and joy, greeted me with a sweet gyre and took me out of the bucket to play with her, and it's not like I had any other choice, although we were similar in size, she was much stronger than me, and she wasn't used to receiving a no for an answer. The girl who had picked me up was none other than the daughter of the company's master, a very friendly but also very spoiled bat, used to bossing everyone around and ensuring that everyone did what she wanted. Of course, she also believed she had the right to take what wasn't hers, so she saw no problem stealing part of the dinner to play with it. I must say that I was older than her, although being a larva I couldn't speak, and I was old enough to understand what was happening around me. I knew that following her was my only chance to survive, so I crawled behind her, went into her room and followed her through a hole in her room that led us to her secret hiding place, the place where she kept all her treasures. And the place, it was full of makeup. All the things Grimm lost ended up in that place, so there was everything. Scarlet, vermilion, carmine, matte eyeshadow, chestnut, honey, blue black, smoky black eyeliner. Wait a minute, Dareth interrupted. Do you remember the colors? And do you know their names? I have a good memory for images, and of course I know the names. The master taught them to me. Before, red was just red to me, but after being under his wing, the color took on a new meaning. Now I understand why it's so strange, Dareth thought, but he remained silent. He was the kind of person for whom cherry and carmine were still red. Well, go on. As I was saying, that secret hiding place became my home for the next few weeks. That day, no one could find the famous pencil, and when the Grimm follower returned to check the bucket of prey, he noticed I wasn't there. It was obvious he was going to notice. I was the only shiny white hairy larva. And that matter unleashed the master's fury. First my pencil. And now a sandwich. This is unacceptable. Theft is taboo in my domain. When the offender is found, my fury will fall upon him. And everyone trembled with fear. Of course, no one thought to suggest that Scarlet had anything to do with this whole missing things thing. She was the teacher's daughter, a little angel incapable of doing anything wrong, and she still didn't have a very clear idea of the concept of good and evil. She didn't see much problem in taking a pencil, because they could always buy another one, so everything was fine. Also because of her age, she didn't fully understand what was happening, or why everyone was so scared. Anyway, days passed, I remained hidden, although I went out from time to steal something to eat. I managed to stay hidden by wrapping myself in a piece of scarlet cloth that I had found in the hiding place. My white color stood out too much in that place. Everything there, from the walls to the people, were painted with the same shade, and everything there followed the aesthetic line of the circus. I was the only thing that broke the scheme, a white dot on a red cloak. At least my clothes were enough to go unnoticed, allowing me to wander around looking for food and listening to other people's conversations. Thanks to that, I learned a lot, including what life was like in the circus, each person's schedule, and especially how terrible the ringmaster was. I confess I was a little afraid of him. Sometimes at night, I dreamed he'd appear out of nowhere in the hideout, sink his claws into me, and then throw me into his mouth. Although there was something curious in all this, Grimm was a black bat with red eyes, but in my dream it was completely scarlet. At that moment I didn't know it, but that detail would have a lot of importance later. The circus I was in wasn't normal, it's a bit complicated to explain why, maybe I'll do it later when I find the right words, bear with me Dareth. Days passed, and the inevitable moment arrived. The circus had to leave. That meant dismantling the tents and rooms, and packing up everything. It was in the middle of the move that they finally discovered me. I was curled up in a corner clutching a coral pink lipstick like a stinger, ready to strike. BFFF how cute laughed Dareth as if that pencil was going to intimidate anyone. I know, a burgundy shade would have been more effective. I'm not so sure. The crimson perhaps. Let's leave it at that, continue. Everything around me was moving and loud noises of furniture being moved could be heard. I trembled in my place fearing the worst, while my paws gripped the pencil with all their strength. I managed to make out some shadows through the cloth that kept me hidden, my whole body tensed, and some tears escaped from my eyes, and then, they removed my cover, I was exposed, naked in all my whiteness to the sight of the follower of Grimm. Oh. What's this? The follower exclaimed. Wait a minute, isn't that the sandwich Steve said he lost? And look at all that makeup. You're the thief. The bug lunged at me, and I managed to dodge it somehow. It was a very agile larva. I screamed for help, but my pleas were drowned out by the voice of the follower who was alerting me to my presence. Soon, a wall of bugs blocked my exit, and I was trapped. The hairs on my body stood on end in terror. Using my last-ditch strategy, I stood up, trying to appear taller and more intimidating, although that only made me look more appealing, I suppose. Oh, look at that meat, he's well fed, it'll be a very tasty snack. Although the teacher will probably reserve it for himself. Maybe I'll share something with whoever catches it. I was crying in terror, my legs were shaking and I could barely breathe. I saw my life flash before my eyes, although there wasn't much to see actually, and just when I had lost all hope, Scarlet came flying in and stood in front of me covering me with her wings and growling at the others. Di-irf. Princess. Di-irg. Princess, let go of that filthy creature. It's just a snack. You don't play with food. Di-irg Di-irg Di-irg. Grimm had forbidden all his subjects from laying a finger on his daughter, only Brum had that privilege, so none of them knew how to handle the situation, and it was necessary for the master himself to intervene in the matter. And that's how I finally had in front of me the nightmare that tormented me in dreams, that elegant bat with its eyes glowing red, and it was surprising to realize that I wasn't as scared as I thought. For some reason the bat of my dreams was scarier. Grimm simply it caused me admiration. I couldn't stop looking at it, although the infatuation it caused me ended as soon as it spoke. So stow away in my domain. He hissed angrily. Thief of sustenance, thief of beauty, where have you hoarded my makeup? My fangs will pierce your flesh. Unable to do anything else, I hugged Scarlet, which made him even more furious. Let go of my child. Scarlet, come to my wings. Di-irg. Scarlet, let him go. Di-irg. Until now, the girl had never disobeyed her father, and this left him impressed. Suddenly, I went from being a thieving stowaway to a bad influence and the downfall of his daughter. Don't ask me how, Dareth. These are interpretations from Brum, who saw the scene and knows Grimm well enough to know what's going on in his head. The thing is, he decided to take a more aggressive stance and walked up to his daughter, grabbing her by the wing. No daddy. Jairg the little girl squealed. Scarlet. Have you spoken? Diog, daddy she started to cry. And just like that, I faded into the background. I was no longer important. Now all that mattered was Scarlet and her first words. Of course, I didn't let the opportunity pass me by and tried to crawl away, but Grimm never stopped paying attention to me. Stop right there, thief. Our business isn't over yet. Jair nuo, ppe. I'm sorry, sweetheart, but stealing is bad and I can't forgive this larva. Obtaining smoky black is complex and stealing it has only caused me trouble. I couldn't speak to defend myself and explain that she was the one who had stolen his pencils, so I did the only thing I could do. I crawled to the hiding place and looked for the pencil I wanted. Do you think that erases the offense? The collection I see is tremendous. Vermilion, beige, ochre, everything here, all stolen pieces. I hurried to find the aforementioned colors and left them at his feet. He just stared at me, not because I had returned the pencils, but because of something else. Can you tell vermilion from cherry? I nodded vehemently. And coral pink. I looked for it among the pencils and left it at his feet as well. No way. Finally. My aesthetic soulmate. Grimm swept me up in his euphoric arms and whirled around the room with me in his hands, squawking something about elegance, delicacy, potential, and other such things. He forbade everyone from eating me and made me part of his company. If I'm honest, Dareth, now that I look back on this story, I think it's pretty weird. You're right, the butterfly commented, it's quite strange, but it's funny, I liked it. I'm glad. Do you understand now, my dear, why I give so much importance to colors? Yes, I understand you, but I don't think that's something necessary for all occasions. That's what a classless bug would say, the moth complained with disdain. Look, Dareth, I'll be very honest, I like you a lot, a lot. You're one of the bugs I like the most, but your lack of class sometimes overwhelms me. I'm sorry. He looked down sadly. Looks aren't something I worry too much about. I was never very handsome or anything, so. Ah, but with a makeover you definitely look divine. Huh? He immediately became nervous. I just have to take off those rags you wear and change them for something more dignified. Hey no, I'm fine the way I am. Oh come on, Snack flew up to Dareth's side, let me try a little bit, I'm sure you love it. For that night, the stories ended, as both had much to discuss about their aesthetic preferences. Note. I don't know if makeup in those shades exists, I just googled colors with unusual names. Okay, let's begin. Theoretically, according to the reading order, this story should come after Tales of Hallownest and before Neverland, although chronologically speaking, it takes place before Tales of Hallownest, except for the final chapter, which has a little bit that takes place later. This is a very, very short fic, just 6 chapters, since I wanted to make Bocadillo's story as compact as possible, so I could get to the end quickly. This fic I don't really think it's bad, but compared to the other two, it's probably a bit short. However, I felt it was necessary to write it, so I did. If you don't like it, you can skip it and wait for my next fic, but for those who are still intrigued by who Boca is and what he's after, this fic will be a must-have. A story while waiting. Now they were in a pretty big bind, one they were unlikely to get out of without help. Moth and Butterfly found themselves caged in Mantis territory, separated from their traveling companions, and surrounded by skilled warriors guarding the site, preventing any possible escape. The situation was delicate. The Mantises' typical secrecy prevented them from discovering their intentions, but knowing this tribe, they didn't expect anything good. Curiously, even with the precariousness of the situation, both Dareth and Bocadillo were quite calm. Perhaps after everything they had been through, their nerves were too shattered to be distressed. Even so, the wait was torturous. The moth had devised at least 3 possible escape plans, but all of them required a mantis to approach the cage, and all of them maintained a prudent distance. This situation wouldn't change until a new day began and they were brought some food, so for now, all they could do was wait. But waiting was torture in itself, locked up with nothing to do they could only think about all the possible tragic endings that awaited them, which was not at all pleasant, they needed something to distract themselves. It was then that the butterfly thought that perhaps a good story would be the best way to pass the time, he loved listening to stories, and Bocadillo loved telling them. Bocadillo. What's up, Dareth? Well, I was remembering that the other day you told me how you met your teacher, but you didn't get to talk about how you got your name. Oh yeah, that's a story, well, it's not that big a deal really. The day the teacher decided to take me in and make me part of the circus, he called a meeting to introduce me to everyone. There were many insects wearing robes and masks, they looked more like members of a demonic cult than circus performers, but there were also others wearing clothes more in keeping with what you would expect from a place like that. To tell the truth, I was just a little kid who couldn't speak. There were many things I didn't understand and a few others whose meaning I didn't understand. I vaguely knew what a circus was, and I wasn't very clear about the details of what life was like in one, so I couldn't realize all the irregularities that existed in the place. The thing is, when everyone was gathered together, the teacher grabbed me and picked me up in his arms to show me to everyone, and I just panicked and started crying. Master, I don't think doing that is good for Larva. Brum came to my defense. It's scaring her. Scaring? My beautiful Scarlet has never suffered such annoyances. Not everyone is like the beautiful Scarlet. MPFH, well, since your knowledge of larvae far surpasses mine, take it upon yourself to guard this snack. And then he dropped me. With how soft the larvae are, obviously nothing was going to happen to me, but it would hurt a little. Fortunately, Brum saved me from the fall and caught me in his arms. Meanwhile, Grimm began to tell everyone about my presence and give them instructions that they should not eat me. This behavior so cold was the first sign I had to understand what kind of person Grimm was, someone self-centered who doesn't like to be criticized and who never shows affection to anyone other than Scarlet, although the latter wasn't so true, he had 1 or 2 people that he appreciated, but his displays of affection towards others were subtle, very subtle. I could tell you for a fact that Brum, besides Scarlet, was the person Grimm loved most in the world, but if you had heard that musician complain like I did, you would have found it hard to believe. Sure, Brum, take care of the baby, be its nanny and look after the creature I decided to adopt. He doesn't even ask my opinion, the musician murmured, so they wouldn't hear him. So as I announced, this tiny plush being holds the title of my aesthetic soulmate, and Grimm, for his part, unaware of anything, continued happily with his speech. She always gives me these chores. I practically raised the last 3 kids myself. I had to clean up their messes, feed them, put them to sleep, get up at 3 in the morning to check on them. It will be part of our spectacle, but not our worship. It would be unjust to impose such a burden on a being who is not even capable of uttering a word and defending his existence. And then he comes along to put on his Dad of the Year face and get hugs. They're not even my kids. I already raised him when he was little. Now he's giving me fake grandchildren. I long for the little one's acceptance among you and his instruction to form a competent artist. I don't deserve this treatment. Without me, I'd be nothing. I'm taking care of Scarlet right now. And you're putting another kid in my side. This bat is going to hear me. I have a lot to tell you. And as if someone had turned off a switch or something, Brum's furious mood immediately changed to a more subdued attitude. Maestro? Could you provide the little one with a corner to rest? Ah sure, but besides that, maybe it would be a good idea to provide him with a name first. It would be wise. What name do you propose? Brum lifted me up to look at me properly, perhaps trying to find a name that matched my appearance. Unfortunately he didn't have a very good eye for that. Anastasio. One of the hooded creatures didn't hesitate to let out a mocking laugh, but it didn't last long, because after a few seconds the robe he was wearing caught fire, and he ran off looking for water to put it out. Did I already tell you that Brum was the maestro's favorite person after Scarlet? He wasn't going to accept anyone laughing at him, no matter how ridiculous his idea was. No one could make fun of Brum, except him. Yes, I know it sounds a bit twisted, and it really is, but well, there were many things that were wrong in that circus. More name proposals are welcome, Grimm said with great calm, although the people around him were not so calm, to say the least. The bugs looked at each other, afraid of saying something that might offend the teacher. After he set fire to the other bug, they thought he was in a bad mood, until finally someone raised their voice among them. It's a sandwich. How about we call it Bocadillo? Divine said. Who is Divine? Dareth asked, the name sounding unfamiliar. Didn't I tell you about her? I don't remember you doing it. Oh well, Divine is a rather cheeky and flirtatious termite queen who's always thinking about food. Wait, a termite queen? What would a termite queen be doing in a circus? I mean, she's an insect queen, she should be in her own kingdom with a colony of subjects at her feet. Queens are proud and don't submit to anyone. Well, Snack shifted somewhat uncomfortably in his seat. There is something that is capable of subduing even the proudest queen. What thing? Fear. And what was she afraid of that made her join that circus? Well, it turns out that Bocadillo hesitated. There were some things that were better left unsaid, especially because they were difficult to explain or even get people to believe, as she knew from past experience. Dareth seemed like a nice guy, but she still didn't trust him or know him well enough to say she wouldn't accuse him of being a demon for something that wasn't even his fault, so she opted to make up some excuse. The bad in itself is a terrifying thing. So Grimm forced her to join. The butterfly noticed the little insect's discomfort, so she decided not to press further. Although she was curious to know the details, she would probably end up lying rather than reveal more information. Well, then Divine named you. Since it's a sandwich, we should call it a sandwich. We'll take that into consideration. Grimm immediately dismissed his idea, but somehow the entire circus was made up of people inept when it came to naming. If Grimm's daughter had a decent name, it was because her mother had given it to her. How lucky she was. How are you, Clovis? Is that even a name? My grandfather was called that. That name is too much for him. How about something like Fluffy? That's a pet name. And isn't it one? Well, it could also be Tank. Buck, that doesn't suit him. Jacinto Ignacio. Horrible, better Asclepius. Esco. And is your name better than mine? The truth is the discussion wasn't getting anywhere, it was even turning out to be counterproductive. For my part, I just squirmed uncomfortably in Grimm's arms. This business of not being able to speak until you're an adult with wings is horrible. I had a name, you know. One that I had given myself, but I couldn't say it, and I just limited myself to covering my face in horror at each nefarious suggestion they gave. The worst thing was that everyone was so proud of their suggestions. Eventually Grimm got tired of their stupid fights and made the most horrible decision of all to draw lots. And I guess the name that came up was Bocadillo. No, actually they called me Asclepius. Oh really? Is your name Asclepius? Not exactly. It turns out Divine never stopped saying I was a tasty snack, and many others followed suit until eventually everyone was calling me a snack. Except for the guy who named me, he called me Asclepius until the very end. BFFF ha 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 ha, what a good story. Dareth laughed heartily at the moth story. You were unlucky with your name. Yeah, I guess. The moth sighed sadly, glancing at the cage where they were captive for the umpteenth time, without being able to see any opening to escape. I don't see any way out now, Dareth lamented. But the plan to attack when they come to bring us food in the morning is still in place, right? Of course, but it's a dangerous plan. If we could avoid it, it would be better. I know the truth is I'm a little nervous, mantises are terrible warriors. The butterfly lowered its head, revealing the discouragement that gripped it due to its situation. They both knew that things might not end well. Without outside help, perhaps one of them would not survive. For obvious reasons, the most likely outcome was that someone would be Bocadillo, something that mortified Dareth. His kind and helpful heart ached at the thought of losing that little bug. With the time they had spent together, he was beginning to grow fond of him. Bocadillo, for his part, showed no sign of stress or dejection. He was too used to being in danger. As he always said, the life of small insects is hard. On the other hand, he had seen things, extraordinary and terrible things. He knew true fear, absolute terror, that oppressive and incapacitating feeling capable of bringing tears and wishing one didn't exist. He knew the being capable of generating all that and more. Fighting mantises were nothing. At least they had a plan that gave him peace of mind. It was worse to be trapped with no way of doing anything. The helplessness was the real torture. Now he just had to wait for the right moment, but time seemed endless. Being trapped in this cage reminds me a little of how complicated my existence was before I underwent my metamorphosis. Well, all insects that undergo metamorphosis suffer something like that. Dareth, being a butterfly and having a development similar to that of a moth, could understand it. But you grew up with your parents, right? Well, they weren't my biological parents, but yes, I had parents who loved me and took care of me a lot. Well, not having parents to take care of you really changes things completely. As a larva, although I understood everything that was happening around me, I couldn't speak to express it. Caterpillars' mouths are made more for eating than for uttering words, so I had no opinion or ability to accuse anyone of anything. Adults usually take great care of their babies and know them so well that they are able to say what they want without any words involved. Do you understand now the difference between having parents and not having them? Ironically, the only person who understood me was Escarlet, who also couldn't speak for me, since the only words she could say fluently were gyre gyre gyre. Curiously, Brum did understand her, but the communication ended there because Brum was very bad at speaking. He limited himself to uttering short sentences that he often cut off in the middle, either by his own will or because Grimm interrupted him. I'd like to say that Grimm was like a father, but I think he would be more like an uncle, like that distant uncle that one is obliged to put up with out of commitment. It must be said, depending on his mood, the master could be quite irritating, but I still appreciate him. He taught me the important things in life. How to select hair products appropriately, how to apply makeup, how to combine colors, aesthetics, elegance. Of course I also learned other things during that time. Brum taught me some practical subjects, such as cleanliness, order and discipline. He was like a mother or father. Well, it doesn't matter, I always called him Brum anyway. Life in the circus wasn't bad, to tell the truth I miss it now. As a rebellious and undisciplined larva I didn't like being told what to do, but with the little I knew of the world, I couldn't really appreciate everything I had. There was food at my disposal, a bed, good quality shampoo and above all security. In the circus nobody would try to eat me, except for Divine, but I knew how to avoid her. I didn't have to hide or try to be silent to avoid being discovered, despite the fact that throughout my childhood I lived with that constantly. A couple of months in the circus were enough for me to slowly forget everything. After getting used to the comforts, my homework seemed to bother me. You might wonder what kind of homework a larva can have. Well, not many really. Brushing Scarlet and practicing dancing were all I had to or could do, but those simple tasks bothered me. I don't know where I got so much arrogance, as if I thought I was a king or a god to whom no one could say anything. Now I think I was very stupid. They didn't owe me anything, they could have eaten me if they wanted, but I felt untouchable for being Scarlet's favorite. Although, well, for a change, I couldn't do anything to avoid my homework. Being so small and mute, any opposition was null and void. All it took was for someone to pick me up to take me to my homework spot or tickle me to make me sway to the rhythm of the music. And what was your dance like? Dareth asked, his eyes flashing with curiosity. It wasn't anything fancy, just standing on my hind legs and shaking to the accordion, although later one of the choreographers came up with something like a modern dance act, with spiritual metaphors about the banality of life and the immensity of death. That act got me really fit, as I had to do some rather complicated acrobatics that required well-formed muscles, as well as jumps and perfect synchronization with the accordion. I practiced until my little legs hurt. Really? And it went well. Of course, my interpretation was perfect, but. The audience fell asleep. Sandwich raised his hands to his face in frustration. Dareth, for his part, although he found the story amusing, tried to console him by patting him on the back. Yeah, they didn't know how to appreciate your dance, it must have been very beautiful. Well, at this point it doesn't matter anymore, I'm not a larva anymore, and I can't make those weird movements that made me look like a living jelly. What are you laughing at? You're welcome. The butterfly found it too funny to imagine Bocadillo wriggling like a jelly, and although she tried to hold back so that he wouldn't take it as a lack of respect, she couldn't, so she adopted a more conciliatory attitude. "Sorry, but imagining a dancing larva is funny." "Yeah, well, I guess it was." He sighed resignedly. Still, it wasn't a bad time. Being little, Scarlett and I had shorter training sessions than normal. Did she train too? That's how children are raised in circuses. The babies born there learn acrobatics and dances from a young age, of course. Practically no children were born in the circus, although I learned the reason for this much later. And that reason was Sandwich remained silent. That was for some reason a delicate question. The moth quickly changed the subject. "I spent my free time playing and exploring the circus, almost always with Scarlett. We were inseparable. Even though she was much younger than me and didn't understand everything I tried to explain to her, we had a great time together. I remember us often getting into mischief, like sewing the circus performers' robes together, hiding Brum's accordion, or adding spice to Divine's food. Honestly, I was almost always the one with the ideas and Scarlett played along, although when we were discovered she took the blame. Nothing was going to happen to her anyway. No one would touch the Grimm treasure. She was the favorite, the spoiled one, the one always favored, and one day that started to bother me. I know it was stupid. I wasn't anyone's child there, just some poor creature they picked up who didn't need any consideration. But I was born with this huge ego that made me believe I deserved more, and one day, I just got mad at Scarlett and started ignoring her. It was childish, but for a kid, it's terrible. She had no other friends her age in the circus, just me. But in my selfishness and immaturity, I didn't consider that. And I didn't consider that, even though we were both kids, due to species issues, I was at too great a disadvantage compared to her. Yes, one day, in one of her many attempts to get my attention, she bit me hard, to the point that my white hair was stained with blood. It wasn't that bad a wound either, it was enough for Brum to pick me up, clean me up and bandage me, and everything was fine, but not for her. Guilt crushed her, and she didn't know how to deal with it. She was only able to escape from me every time she saw me, and well, you can imagine who was chasing who now, but with how slow he was, I would never catch her. And well, I didn't have time to fix things when this event happened. A few days after that I started spitting out silk. Suddenly I couldn't eat anymore and was only able to throw up silk, plus a tremendous cold invaded me and well, you know how it is, one instinctively weaves a cocoon to keep warm and when it's over, one falls asleep. That would be the last time Scarlett would see me as a larva, and although I was still the same, she still wasn't able to understand it. For her it was the equivalent of her best friend dying. Bocadillo's story was interrupted by murmurs in the surroundings. There was movement in the nearby mantises. A pair of mantises appeared for the changing of the guard, in addition to an extra individual bringing breakfast. The time to act had arrived. Both creatures were unarmed, but Sandwich was able to use his soul to create a long stinger that Dareth could wield. The downside was that the weapon he created could only manage 5 hits before collapsing. That was all its power was capable of. 5 hits was all they had to gain freedom, and Dareth was responsible for deciding how to use them. That was a lot of pressure. "Don't worry, no matter what happens, I won't blame you for anything," said Bocadillo as he took his place on the butterfly's back. They were ready to wage the decisive battle. The weapon was created and hidden beneath the wings of the larger insect. As soon as they opened the cage, they would pounce on the mantises. 5 individuals stood between them and their freedom, a target for each blow. They couldn't afford to miss. The praying mantis, with its breakfast, approached the cage and was about to touch it when something distracted it. 5 pairs of antennae moved toward the door of the room where strange sounds were approaching. Screams, bangs and a particular buzzing sound very characteristic of bees could be heard. "Sandwich, I think they made it, our colleagues have come to rescue us," he was overjoyed. "Yes, we will live one more day. The tale of a goodbye." Crystal Peaks was an extremely dangerous place. Behind the overwhelming beauty of the pink crystals, there was a labyrinth of sharp stones capable of piercing even the hardest shell. Added to that, the place was full of dangers, wild bugs that swarmed around the place looking for food and hard-working bugs that mined in the eternal search for a treasure they would never find. That definitely wasn't the right place for a fragile little moth. Snack wasn't reckless, but anyone could make a mistake, and his carelessness when dealing with certain flying insects had led him to discover they weren't as harmless as he thought. Their ability to throw sharp crystals that shattered on contact made them extremely dangerous, and because of them, he ended up with a broken wing. It wasn't a serious wound, but not being able to fly took away one of his main defensive techniques, and on the ground he was much clumsier and slower, which was why Dareth had chosen to carry him in his arms to protect him. For the butterfly, this wasn't a bother at all. Having him so close now allowed her to freely touch the furry collar around her neck, a privilege that not many possessed, but that most of her group desired. Often, those who knew the moth had the desire to stroke him as if he were some kind of pet. Dareth was no exception, but he tried to restrain himself from rubbing him. However, the moth soon realized everything. "Okay, you can touch my fur collar," the insect growled resignedly. "Huh? Really? Yeah, go ahead, anyway, Master used to do the same thing to me every time he picked me up, or when he needed to relax, or when I'd just taken a bath and my hair was softer well, whenever he felt like it, he even used me as a pillow once. Oh, it must have been terrible. Well, not really, looking back, I've been through worse things, but of course, for a proud moth just emerging from its cocoon, it was the worst thing in the world. The day I emerged from my cocoon there were a large number of bugs watching, of course, it's not something you see every day for an insect to transform from a worm into a winged being, and larvae hide their chrysalides very well, so that no one attacks them during their metamorphosis. For all that, as soon as my wrapping began to stir and show signs of me coming out, a good group gathered, however, when I was already outside, I opened my wings and my eyes, the first thing I saw was the sinister silhouette of the master. I shuddered when I saw him bend down and pick me up, I almost feared he was going to bite my head off, but the first thing he did was rub my fur. It was impossible to imagine that what was in my domain was the offspring of a high being. "High King," I said, confused, uttering the first words of my life. "Wonderful, you speak." After their metamorphosis, moths can speak, Brum explained, leaning closer. Before they become adults, they don't have that ability, but that's because their mouths aren't made for speaking words, although they understand and remember everything you say to them. Grimm's claws closed on my body and squeezed so hard that breathing became difficult, then he looked at me with his red eyes in the most threatening and horrible way someone could look at you. "So you have been a witness to my words and guardian of my moments," he said this with a sweet and terrifying voice. Don't ask me how a voice can be sweet and terrifying at the same time, but he managed it. The truth is, I don't remember much, I lied, terrified. He immediately loosened his grip on my body, and his expression softened, taking on a very harmless attitude, that of an absolute gentleman. "Too bad anyway, welcome to the company. Well, you know, sometimes when you're in front of a baby or a pet you say and do things you would never do in public, well that happened with Grimm. He didn't know that caterpillars remember our life before metamorphosis and well, let's just say he committed quite a few indiscretions in front of me. Oh, I know that look, okay, I'll tell you a few, but don't even think about talking about this, Dareth. I know the chances of you running into the master's circus are minimal. But if that does happen, don't say anything, the master would kill me, literally speaking. The teacher sometimes hummed songs, perhaps he had a great artistic sense, he knew how to act, dance, decorate, he was good at crafts and a great speaker, but there was only one thing he couldn't do well, and that was sing. He had a deep raspy voice that he could hardly make sound good, he knew it himself, so he didn't try, but you know how people are, always longing for what they don't have or can't do, so when he was alone in privacy, Grimm sang, yes, he always wanted to do it with an audience, so imagine for him to have me, a little larva supposedly ignorant of everything who will never remember anything, and that's how I had to put up with his screams more than once. And well, the other thing she did was cry so much that all her makeup ended up running, it was embarrassing to see him, but that's not something nice to remember, the truth is that even I felt pain seeing him like that, at that time I didn't know why she cried, and now that I know it seems even more terrible to me. And why was your teacher crying? For the fate of his daughter. That she was sick or something? Well, it was something a little more complex than that. This time it was difficult for Bocadillo to stop himself from speaking. Things were happening so slowly and gradually that he almost didn't notice. He was growing fond of Dareth and trusting him more and more. If he continued like this, one day he would end up telling him everything, and in a way, that terrified him. He was afraid of how he would see him when he found out the truth. He really liked the butterfly. It had been a long time since he had become so attached to someone. If he suddenly hated him, or rather, if he suddenly became afraid of him, it would be something very painful to bear. But I guess you could define it as a kind of illness that would determine your long-term destiny. He chose to lie, his wall of secrets still able to resist. Is this going to be a story with a sad ending? The butterfly whimpered. No, well, I don't know, it's not over yet, and until it's over, you can't say something ended badly anyway. Aren't the lives of all living beings a collection of tragedies and joys? Even your own life has a lot of that. Dareth thought about it for a few moments. Yes, you're right. Of course I have. I may not have lived that many years, but I've had many different experiences. Even in my early days as an adult moth, I learned a lot. When my wings emerged, when I could pronounce words and my limbs were capable of holding a pencil, my formal education had just begun, and my life took a radical turn. For the first time since I was born, people began to take me seriously. I stopped being that adorable pet that everyone fed and looked down on, and became an equal to be respected, just like any of them, except for one difference. I was never made to wear a mask. Did I mention that everyone in the circus wore a mask? or, failing that, a half mask. The mask seemed to me to be a mark indicating belonging to the troop, a sort of proof that they were part of that big family of creatures, a family I longed to be part of but was denied entry to. I once asked a ringmaster when I would get my own mask, and his response was, "Only artists wear masks. Why would you wear one?" It's not that wearing a mask was really important, but I believed it was. I thought it was proof of my acceptance into the company, and Grimm's words made me believe it even more strongly. Only an artist could wear a mask, and I wasn't one. They'd put me in the act doing these ridiculous worm dances just to be useful in some way, but it wasn't a real act that would get applause, so I made it my mission to become part of the act, to be a real artist. And so I started practicing and searching for my talent. I did all sorts of things. Juggling, balancing, dancing, even singing a little. I'm not bad at all, but my voice is too small to be noticed. Anyway, I tried hard to stand out and get a leading role, but no matter what I did, the teacher refused to give me my mask. In fact, he didn't encourage me to do it. Ignore these matters and return to your duties, Scarlet needs a partner. Yes, that was the reality. The teacher only wanted me to take care of Scarlet, to be her nanny, but since my metamorphosis, getting along with her was no longer so easy. In her eyes, her small, elongated playmate had crawled into that cocoon and disappeared forever. She couldn't understand that I was the same person but in a different form, and the fact that I could talk didn't help. Now I was just another boring adult, and although I tried to talk to her and get along, all I received was rejection. Oh Dareth, you were really lucky to have parents. The feeling of being out of place, of not belonging anywhere is horrible. Now that I'm older, I can say that I exaggerated when I thought everyone rejected me. It wasn't like that. In reality, no one was mean to me or made fun of me. It's just that they simply weren't my parents, and no one can love you like your true family does, although you can generate sincere affection in others. It's funny to remember it now. I really insisted a lot to Scarlet to be my friend again. As children we were inseparable, and although things had changed a little, I didn't want to lose her, so I insisted daily that she play with me. I suppose that with time we got used to that dynamic. I would chase her, and she would run away until one day I didn't follow her anymore. It was a matter of age. It was that time in a kid's life when they start noticing other people and seek out a romantic relationship. Although I wasn't in any serious relationships at the time, I did flirt with a lot of girls in the audience I managed to meet, though honestly, they didn't take me seriously. As always, because of my appearance, they saw me more as a pet or something, like that cute little creature you just want to pet or befriend, not as a man. I definitely stopped paying attention to Scarlet, and she suddenly realized how much she cared for me. She started chasing me, but I ignored her. She'd look for me, but I'd distance myself. Yes, most of the time, our relationship was complicated. My priority at that time was to meet a pretty girl to have a good time with. I admit I was very irresponsible. I didn't just neglect Scarlet, but also my other duties, like the cleaning duties we all had to do or my practice for presentations. Before things got any more complicated, Brum talked to me. "Bocadillo, you missed rehearsals yesterday and today." But I did go the day before yesterday. "Rehearsals are every day, you haven't been keeping up, nor have you cleaned the rooms." "Yes, I did. Just wiping the furniture and doing nothing else doesn't count. And I'm telling you, although it was truly my fault, my stupid pride as a young man who thinks he's the king of the world prevented me from recognizing it, and I preferred to look for any excuse to avoid taking responsibility. I was tired, I've been under a lot of stress these days." "Does it stress you out when girls reject you?" That comment really hurt me, it made me angry. "What do you know about my problems? What do you care? You're not even my family. Blood ties are not necessary. Now you're going to tell me you're my family? I'm not part of this place. I'm not part of you. I don't wear a mask, I'm just a strange guest. It's better not to have it." Brum lowered his head. He wasn't going to explain to me why I couldn't have my own mask. I knew it, and that made me angrier. My hair fluffed up at my indignation, which as always, it makes me look more endearing than terrifying. In fact, the musician stared at me. Maybe I couldn't see his expression because of the mask, but I could guess it. Is it better not to have it? Of course, because then they can't read my expressions. Instead, you keep them hidden. Stop pretending we're something. No one's interested in me. Scarlet wouldn't say that. That brat doesn't care about me. Maybe we were friends when I was little, but now I'm just a nuisance to her. She doesn't love me, and I'm not interested in her either. And then the crying started. Neither Brum nor I knew it, but Scarlet was hiding in the room listening to the argument, and my words hurt her deeply. "Jai-I-I-erg Malfiluo Jai-I-I-erg." I hadn't even realized that Scarlet was already learning to communicate better at that time. I just ignored her, never paying attention to her strange babbling or realizing that she could say my name. How could I be angry with her? She was just a poor little girl with a tragic fate, spoiled and ignorant of the world, so moved, I went over to her and hugged her, and after that, we made up. And well, I can't say that my attitude had changed in any way, except for the fact that now I did take care of Scarlett, otherwise I was still as whiny and irresponsible as ever. I still wasn't doing my cleaning duties properly, and I only attended rehearsals when I felt like it. In fact, it was the latter that precipitated some things. Grimm really ignored matters related to rehearsals. He had a solo act, and there were people in charge of choreographing and coming up with new numbers, so if I didn't go to rehearsals, he didn't care much, as long as I performed well on the dance floor. But if you don't practice every day, you lose your ability, and that's what happened to me. A disaster struck one night when I was performing an aerial juggling act. Some clowns were juggling balls on the ground while I was also juggling midair. Every so often, I had to exchange balls with one of the clowns below while performing some tricks in the air. Under normal circumstances it wasn't a very complicated act for me, but I hadn't practiced much that week and I failed. I dropped a couple of balls, one of the bugs on the floor tripped over one of them and made another one fall, creating a chain reaction that ruined the act and made the audience burst into laughter. Of all the things that could anger Grimm, ruin an act, it was the worst of all. Someone like him, who is always concerned with aesthetics, who strives by all means to present an act as elegant and beautiful as possible, this was simply unacceptable. I had gotten myself into a terrible mess. The time that passed from that incident until the end of the show felt like an eternity, and every performer who came out of the ring and met me only looked at me with pity. The anguish I endured during that hour was horrendous. I just wanted to run and hide, but there was nowhere. Grimm was the lord and master of that circus. No one moved without his knowledge. I was lost. And when the show was finally over and the audience had left, like a gust of wind it rushed towards me and grabbed me by the lint, throwing it away without a care. "You bastard. You ruined the show. You precipitated the event into a disaster devoid of any elegance. How could you? My event tainted by your incompetence, your irresponsibility. What pathetic excuse can you propose as justification for such an outrage?" I could barely speak. It was difficult with those fiery eyes staring at me and those fangs in front of my face. I was so scared. It really felt like he was going to eat me, and I had no excuse for my mistake. If I had attended practice, none of this would have happened. It was a mistake. In my circus there are no mistakes. Terror invaded me. Grimm was going to eat me. Well, actually I'm not sure if he would have been able to do it. I was his aesthetic soulmate and a child of high being. In his head, these were reasons to spare my life, but I don't know if these were more important than having ruined an act. All I know is that just at that moment, Scarlett came to my defense. He hugged his father's face while screaming no, no, no. That was all the defense I needed. Grimm never denied anything to his daughter, and this would be no exception. He preferred to forgive my mistake rather than let her cry, and thanks to that is why I am here in front of you, Dareth. "What a story," exclaimed the butterfly. "And what happened next?" "Things got awkward at the circus, and I eventually left. Not even that terrible incident deterred me from wasting my time chasing girls. Ultimately, leaving was the best thing for everyone. Still, I didn't leave on bad terms. No. No, the boys threw a farewell party. Scarlett cried because I was leaving, and Grimm, well, he didn't say anything. In fact, he wasn't even present at the party, nor did he speak to me about it afterward." "You couldn't say goodbye to him?" "Actually, yes, because when I was leaving, before I left the circus, he appeared in front of me in an explosion of fire." "Little snack finally takes flight," he said as soon as he saw me, his face completely expressionless. "Teacher? What are you doing here?" Saying goodbye to the only being who danced beneath the heart of the nightmare without falling into its clutches. It was never possible to enchant you. Your divine aura protected you. "What are you talking about?" "Of something that would be better if you never knew." He gave a deep sigh. "So small and insignificant, so fragile and weak, but with such power that it could bend a storm. You don't know what hides under your own wings. Nobody knows, not even me." "I don't understand anything." He just smiled at my answer and handed me a small suitcase. "If one day the meaning of my words had any meaning to you, I would be happy if you would return to my company to finish my song. After all, you seem to be better at singing than I am." Okay, I don't know what he meant by that, but I guess I owe him too much to ignore his request. And then he gave me a final bow, after which he vanished in a burst of fire. "And what was in the suitcase your master gave you?" Dareth asked. "Not many things, a little money and the 5 balls I used for my juggling. I never imagined that those items would be what would help me earn a living. From then on, I usually work as a street performer, whether juggling, dancing, or singing poems. Deep down, I think I was raised well, and even though I didn't appreciate it at the time, my childhood wasn't really bad." "Well, so you never saw the teacher again?" "Well, I think that's a story I'd better tell you another day. The tale of a love pain." They had rested hidden among the vegetation, in a small shelter built with such skill that it was as comfortable as it was discreet, but for Dareth the place was far from being to his liking. Perhaps it was because of his considerable size, or because he was so accustomed to the comforts of the city, that sleeping in the wild on a bed of moss was problematic. He watched with envy as his white companion fell asleep almost instantly, undisturbed by outside noises or the texture of the plants, and this was why it took so long before he managed to fall asleep. Having gone to sleep late, he obviously woke up late and to his surprise, and perhaps some fear, Bocadillo was no longer in the shelter. He got up and immediately set out to look for him. Without realizing it, he had developed a certain protective attitude towards the little boy. He was so fragile and weak, anything could kill him. He searched desperately around and soon found it. In fact, it hadn't gone far and was sitting in a corner among the grass, talking to a log. Or maybe it wasn't a log at all. There was something special about that mossy lump. It had a very distinctive shape, quite similar to an insect. Was it talking to a corpse? "Bobo, Sandwich. What are you doing?" "Ah." The insect started and turned nervously to his friend. "No, nothing. I was just admiring the view." "The landscape or the corpse?" "You are the corpse is part of the landscape." Dareth tilted his head, searching for another angle. "Well, it makes sense, I guess, but it's creepy, your interest in that dead man." "It's not the body that interests me, it's what's hidden from view." He suddenly fell silent, sure that Dareth would think he was crazy for talking about invisible things. In truth, it was something that had happened to him once. "Are you one of those people who can see ghosts?" The moth jumped in surprise. "Don't you find it strange?" "Of course I find it strange, but the world is full of strange things. People who see ghosts aren't very common, but once in my time as a city guard, I met one or two creatures with those abilities." "Really?" he said excitedly. It seemed strange to Dareth that Sandwich would get so excited about something so small, but the moth had its reasons. He rarely found someone so understanding that they were able to believe they saw things that no one else could. It was truly lucky for him to have met this butterfly. He was a great friend and he believed him. Perhaps he could even talk to him about those things that he couldn't talk to anyone about. The little white one took flight and fluttered happily around the larger bug that looked at him amusedly. Sandwich even had grace in his flight. He didn't have the clumsy and frantic flapping of a moth. There was a certain elegance in his movements. It even made him want to fly for a while, although that place so full of thorns and dangerous bugs wasn't very appropriate. In fact, right now, Sandwich, in his carefree flight, didn't realize that he was hurtling towards a moss creeper. "Sandwich, be careful." The moth noticed the creature at the last minute, but before colliding with it, it flashed a light from its hand, momentarily blinding everyone, even Dareth. When he regained his vision, he found the moth safely on the ground, unharmed, and the moss creeper still somewhat dazed on a wall. Wow, was that magic? That's how it is. Truth be told, Dareth had seen Bocadillo perform magic before to defend himself, but it was always a surprise to see a new trick. "You should be more careful." "Please, you don't have to worry. I've faced dangers far worse than that bush with legs. I know how to defend myself. Life has taught me." "Yes, but you're very small and that never stopped me, not even when I was a young boy just facing life on my own. When I left the circus, I really knew nothing about the world. I thought a pair of swift wings were all it took to face any difficulty. It's what we tend to believe when we're larvae, that when we become adults, everything will be fun and joy, or at least that's what I believed. If I'd had parents, perhaps they would have explained things to me a little better. Being an adult is only the beginning of problems, and I discovered that on the first day of my independence. The place where the circus left me was a quiet but very small town, where work wasn't exactly plentiful, and the main source of income was hunting. As you might guess, that wasn't my thing. I was dedicated to art and acrobatics. I also wasn't blessed with a large body to bring down prey, and given the precarious conditions there, I could only aspire to be a window cleaner. You know, my small size and my wings allowed me to reach all sorts of nooks and crannies, but I didn't like that job. The pay was poor and my hair ended up a mess, plus I didn't have the basic equipment to ensure proper personal care. I hated that place. A tiny town with no opportunities wasn't the kind of place for me, so as soon as I managed to save enough, which took a while, I left in search of a better future. Those times they were really hard. For the first time I truly appreciated what I had in the circus, a safe place where no one would hurt me, plus I realized all the problems that come with being small. I guess it was because of that first shitty week that I'm always defensive around the big guys now. In that single miserable week I was almost devoured 3 times by wild beasts, although it seems I'm a lucky bug because the 3 bugs that tried to eat me were eaten by other bigger bugs before killing me. But that wasn't the only tragedy I lived through. I had to face a downpour with drops so thick I could have drowned in one. I was also assaulted by a group of thieves who felt so sorry for me that they gave me away breakfast, and a cricket proposed to me. No, Dareth, I'm not going to talk about it, don't look at me like that please. Oh come on, that sounds like a really good story. But it's embarrassing and disgusting. Come on, please tell us. The butterfly looked at him with such pitiful eyes that the moth ended up giving in. Okay, but let's never mention this again, okay? Actually, that cricket was from something like a prestigious mafia family. Yes, you heard that right, Dareth, a mafia family. The thing is, she'd been betrothed without consulting another cricket from another family of the same ilk. Unfortunately, the girl didn't agree and wasn't willing to get married without a fight, so she ran away from home with nothing but a suitcase. But the truth is, she wasn't a very smart girl. She didn't plan her move well, she wasn't even the least bit discreet, and she was discovered, so she ended up in the middle of a chase trying to win her freedom. It was in the middle of her run that she ran into me, and seeing herself trapped, she blurted out the first thing that came to mind. I'm in love with this guy and I'm not going to marry my fiancé. What? But I don't know you. I screamed in panic, but it was as good as saying nothing, because no one heard me. And I'm not entirely sure how it happened, but somehow I ended up in some sort of duel to the death with this cricket's fiancé. If I won, I'd get her and I guess the organization. Honestly, that memory seems very surreal now. I'm not entirely sure of the details. The thing is, this cricket from a mafia family was very skilled with weapons. He had an aginata that he handled very well, in addition to years of experience training and a few deaths under his belt. Well, I was just a little artist moth without any kind of battle training. My only defense was to fly away, but obviously they already had that point covered. They tied my wings. It would have been a disgrace to the cricket if her supposed lover had abandoned her out of cowardice. That would have made her look very bad, so even if I had to, I would fight for her. That selfish brat got me into such a nasty mess. She never thought of anyone but herself, and that's why she condemned me to die. But of course, the fact that I'm here already tells you how the story ended. But don't think I just woke up my powers out of nowhere and beat them up. Unfortunately, life isn't like an adventure novel. Although I don't deny that extraordinary things sometimes happen, once again my good luck saved me. They had given me a thorn to defend myself, although given my size, it seemed to me like a sting in all its splendor, but that would be of no use to me if I didn't know what to do with it, so there I stood, trembling in the middle of the battlefield, while that cricket approached with a confident face ready to finish me off. And just before he lunged at me out of nowhere, a dragonfly appeared and pierced his chest with its double stingers, ending his life. Everyone was speechless, the two families, the runaway bride, no one dared to say a word, the family heir was dead, which meant that now there would be a great dispute for power, unless the bride took command, since she was also an heiress or something like that. The truth is I didn't see her as having any gift for command, and in any case that was a concern that would come later, because for now her duty was to kill the murderer, but that wasn't easy. The girl was strong and agile, she blocked some attacks, dodged others and very firmly, she grabbed me from the ground where I had been trembling and escaped with me in her arms. She was Shell, a mercenary for hire and my first love. Sandwich's spirits plummeted at the mention of the dragonfly. It wasn't hard to guess that it was a painful memory. Dareth, in an act of understanding and camaraderie, patted him on the back, seeking to cheer him up. If you don't want to talk about it, it doesn't matter. I've never been in love yet, but it must be terrible to love someone and not even have that person pay attention to you. Huh? No, she did pay attention to me. We dated for a while. Yeah. The moth gave him an annoyed expression. Why does everyone react like this when I mention I was boyfriend of a dragonfly? It's just that dragonflies are some of the tallest creatures there are and you're so. Size isn't everything, Dareth. The little one squealed. His companion turned red. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Although the white creature calmed down and resumed the melancholic attitude it had before, I suppose that might matter a little. Shell was a mercenary, accustomed to the rough life, the blood, the fights, and dealing with other insects as ruthless and strong as she was. She'd been paid to kill the heir of that mafia family, one of the toughest targets due to the strength of their security detail, and she accepted the challenge without hesitation. And she managed to complete it. Plus, she got the bonus of bringing me along. It wasn't in her plans to save anyone, but according to what she told me, she found me so cute that she wanted to take me with her. Well, I suspect that at first she saw me as something of a pet, hugging me and talking to me as if I were mentally retarded. It was really annoying, but I didn't complain and followed her. It was just too convenient. Traveling with her was safe, so my plan was to stay by her side until we reached a large city where I could practice my craft as an artist. The trip was long. I had no influence or money to ask him to take me to the city I wanted, and at the slightest suggestion that I should decide the route, I would simply say, "If you don't like it, you leave." What else could I do? So I went through all sorts of things. I was her partner in every crazy mission she came up with, but despite the scares I don't regret it. With her I learned to survive in wild environments, how to hide, how to build traps, throw knives, deceive predators, in short, all the skills that have allowed me to survive to this day. And from living together so much, we grew fond of each other. Besides the fact that, in that wild and cruel life she'd had to live, she'd never met anyone like me, a more delicate, attentive, polite person, who didn't solve everything with violence little by little. Without realizing it, I seduced her, and one day, that happened, and we became boyfriend and girlfriend. They were good times, despite the dangers, the weapons, the wild beasts, the gangs of vermin, the fights and all that. I remember her fondly. I loved her very much, but it seems that she didn't love me that much. Shell was a very strong girl, or so it seemed at first glance. When you stood before her, all you could think of was a fierce warrior, with her tall, scarred body and fierce gaze, but physical strength and the ability to kill aren't necessarily linked to strength of spirit. She was deeply affected by how others saw her. I'm sure she enjoyed spending time with me and listening to my stories and poems, but she didn't just listen to me. She also heard the taunts of other insects in the guild who ridiculed her for having such a small, pathetic boyfriend. I didn't care. I was able to endure their teasing and insults, but it was too much for her. She felt increasingly ashamed of being with someone like me, and that's how one day she dumped me, just for being small. If he dumped me because he didn't love me anymore, or because he liked someone else, I'd have been fine with that. But dumping me because I'm short? What kind of reason is that? That was a huge blow to my self-esteem. It truly devastated me. At least she had the courtesy to leave me in a big city. After months of me suggesting we go there and her ignoring my wishes, she finally agreed to take me to the place I wanted. But at that moment, it didn't matter anymore. My sadness was too much. I hope you never have to face a pain like this, Dareth, because it is one of the most horrible things there is. It's like carrying a stone in your heart whose edges scratch your chest with every step you take, with every inhalation, and even when you try not to think about it, that pain is still there, digging deep, preventing you from distracting yourself, constantly reminding you of what you lost. But over time I've come to the conclusion that all things happen for a reason. I had to meet her and learn everything I learned from her, just as it was necessary for our relationship to end and for me to arrive in that city, because what happened there marked me forever. My first days in the city were disastrous. I wandered the streets like a lost soul, crying shamelessly. My white fur turned gray, my eyes were swollen, and I lost weight. I was a shadow of what I once was. With no one to comfort me, I only sank deeper and deeper into my spiral of depression and self-pity. It was then that she found me. "Boo?" Dareth asked expectantly. "Hey, don't you hear something?" I can't hear anything." "Come on, keep counting." "No, I mean it, Dareth, something is stalking us." The moth's attitude finally convinced the butterfly to be on the alert. He was almost always right. It was like a sixth sense, perhaps the ability to see things he couldn't, or perhaps it was simply years of practice escaping predators. They both remained silent, waiting for what was going to happen. Everything was very quiet, perhaps too quiet. The moth's antennae twitched nervously as she desperately searched for the source of her concern until she finally found it. Where there was only a bush, she detected a threat. Before Dareth could react, Sandwich materialized a blade of light and threw it at a bush. A monstrous claw burst out of it, deflecting the projectile with a swipe of its hand. Since it was no longer possible to remain hidden, the predator stalking them chose to reveal itself in all its splendor, its 6 eyes flashing among the vegetation and a terrifying roar preceding its appearance. Both terrified males fled, and the swiftest turned out to be the smaller one, who fled far away, leaving his companion abandoned to its fate. The moth's actions deeply wounded the butterfly, who had no choice but to try to manage as best he could, moving clumsily through the vegetation. Bocadillo was easy to manage given his small size, but for a creature of his size, things weren't that simple. After all, being small could bring advantages in certain cases. He remained on the run for several minutes, unable to allow the predator to catch him, but also unable to free himself. This chase couldn't last forever, he knew that well, but terror and exhaustion made him the more vulnerable of the two. He already felt like he was running out of air and couldn't hold out much longer. But then a small voice called to him. "Dareth. This way." Snack squealed. The butterfly saw its companion flying in the middle of the entrance towards a passage that led to another area of the territory, one plagued by thorns. Flying there sounded good, but it had its drawbacks. To wander around there they had to do it with extreme care and slowly if they didn't want to end up hurt, and the situation was not one to take things calmly. Unfortunately, however, the little one insisted in its calls, urging it to follow it. What did it intend? That was too dangerous. But despite everything, Dareth decided to trust him and followed him, entering the passage with the hunter on his heels. As Darrett passed, Sandwich immediately materialized a dagger of light and threw it at a hidden rope barely visible in the vegetation. This triggered a mechanism, releasing a huge thorny log that hurtled toward the pursuing beast. It struck it square in the face with such force that it instantly knocked it out. "Good, that will give us some time," declared the moth. "Now we can fly more calmly through the maze of thorns, and when we reach the other side we can consider ourselves safe." He expected some response from his companion, but only received silence. The butterfly was shocked watching its unconscious attacker on the ground. "Is something wrong, Dareth?" "Coco, how did you do that?" "Ah well while I was chasing you I quickly set this trap." "Did you use me as a distraction?" There was indignation in his voice. "No, if I had wanted you as a distraction, I would have simply left without even trying to save you. It was never my intention to abandon you, but I needed time to put this together. There was a risk, yes, but I trusted you to give me enough time. Besides, this is something I've done many times. You could say I'm an expert at cheating." "Trap expert?" "Yes, during my time with Shell, the only thing I could help her with was setting traps to capture her targets. She taught me, and I surpassed her. What I learned from her served me well, and I still use it to this day. That's why despite all the pain and unpleasant memories I'll never regret having met her." A magical tale. At the top of the withered kingdom, on the summit of the mountain that represented that world, two insects contemplated the magnificence of a statue, the crown of that world, and the last vestige of a tribe lost in time. For each observer, the monument represented something different. For Dareth, it was simply an architectural marvel and a mystery that remained unsolved. What did this statue represent? Who built it? Why? For Bocadillo, however, it was a clue to his own origins and a reminder of his nature, the one he hadn't been able to awaken, or rather, feared to awaken. He could see more than just the stone that stood before him. The place teemed with memories and magic, too much information for a moth. Overwhelmed, he sat on the ground, hugged his knees, and began to tremble. "Sandwich, are you okay?" his worried companion asked, approaching. Am I like her?" "Like who?" In response, the moth simply raised its hand and pointed at the statue. "Is that Hulk someone?" "Look at her closely, she has a face, she's a moth like me, we look alike." "Huh?" Dareth paused for a moment, studying the monument. "It doesn't look like you, and it's way too big." "Dareth, how many times do I have to tell you, size isn't everything." He seemed annoyed this time, but calmed down after a few moments. "I'm sorry, it's just the place oozes essence and memories, she's the source of all the pain here." "The pain? Wait. Are you telling me this statue is the one that caused the infection?" "Not the statue, but the creature it represents, and that creature is a moth, a tall being like me." "High being?" "Yes, and this thing about being tall, please don't relate it to height or size, because it has nothing to do with it, it's more related to power. I know that in theory I'm not powerful, but my teacher said that I had a lot of power inside, only my fear prevented me from using it, and that if I were able to get it out, I could become a king or something like that. It's true that I'm afraid of doing something like that, I don't know about politics or how to make people follow me, nor do I know how to impose myself on others, I'm just a little moth who's afraid of hurting others, and what's in this kingdom, would I be capable of doing something like that? It terrifies me to think about it." Dareth didn't really know what to say. His friend was tiny, a whiny white fluff that he always had to protect from all danger. He found it hard to believe that an adorable little thing like him could cause death and illness to an entire kingdom. Of course, he didn't want to discredit him or call his statements lies or ridiculous ideas, but the little one magically knew exactly what he was thinking. "Yeah, I figured you wouldn't believe me, no one ever does." "Sandwich, I didn't want. I never told you about my time with the teacher, right?" "No." "Well, you still need to know a very important part of my story. I told you before that after my breakup with Shell, I was left hurt and abandoned in a big city, right? Well, fortunately, my time of misery didn't last long. One day, while I was drowning in my sadness, I was found by a black snail, yes, like that weird guy we saw last time. I think it would be good if I first told you about this very particular race. From what I understand, these creatures are native to Hallownest, and almost all of them are well versed in magic. It's almost part of their culture to learn it. There aren't many of these individuals, and after what we've seen exploring this place, I think there are far fewer of them today. An important detail is that these types generally have a kind of aversion or hatred toward moths, and guess what? I'm a moth. The snail that found me shouldn't have helped me, she should have just walked on and ignored me, but the pathetic state I was in, skinny, dirty and covered in tears, I think touched her heart, or maybe just like Shell found me cute and decided to help me. I think being cute can be an important advantage in life. She took me home, washed me, fed me, dried my tears, and since everyone touched the fluff on my neck, I think that's something that will never change, no matter how much time passes. Having nowhere else to go, I stayed with her for a while. She wouldn't let me leave, worried that I'd end up somewhere and be devoured. And so my heart kept hurting, but each day it hurt a little less, until one day I was finally able to get up again and move on. It was a strange experience, really. The pain of a breakup is staggering. No matter what you do, your chest hurts. Even when you're not thinking about anything, it still hurts. It's like a wound in the spirit that stings constantly. But just as wounds heal one day, the pain of love also heals, although it takes some time. It took me 2 months to feel better, and when I did, I only just realized what a strange place I'd fallen into. The snail's house was filled with weeds, insect parts, old books, and mold, not because she didn't clean, she let the mold grow because she ate it. But all that aside, she was a good person. Her name was Dana, and she was one of the kindest creatures I've ever met. It's a shame her neighbors didn't think the same. She lived on the outskirts of that big city, and there were all sorts of strange rumors about her. That she was a monster who worshipped demons, that she summoned spirits, that she only brought misfortune, and that every time someone got sick, it was her fault. Of that, only half was true, sort of. She never harmed anyone, never caused any illnesses or curses. It's true that she was a little weird, but that didn't make her evil. In fact, she often cured illnesses and helped people, but that wasn't enough to stop them from calling her a witch. But she wasn't a witch, she was a shaman. She spoke to spirits, practiced magic, and worshipped her god. What was wrong with that? Of course, people are always afraid of things they don't understand, and Dana was certainly hard to understand. She often talked to herself or did things that didn't make sense in the present, but would in the future. I'm very curious, you know. And I wanted to understand her, so I asked her to teach me a little of her magic, but I won't teach you anything, he declared as soon as I asked him. Because you have no skills. But you haven't even evaluated me. I know it just by looking at you. Please, even if I can't do magic, I want to learn the theory. I refuse, you shouldn't learn. Because? Why not? Give me a logical reason. Because you're a disgusting white moth. This response left me speechless. What was wrong with being a white moth? It made no sense to me. Was there something I didn't know? Some clue about my species or my past? I didn't know my parents or anyone like me. Throughout my life, I've encountered other brown, gray, green, even mottled white moths, but none that were pure white like me. Their response and their aggressiveness intrigued me. Suddenly, unraveling the mysteries of magic became an obsession. I'll say that after I recovered, I tried to be a contributor around Dana's house. I tried to clean as much as possible in that hellish chaos, and I also went out daily to work as a street performer to earn a few coins so that the snail wouldn't have any complaints about me and wouldn't kick me out. Although I was already well enough to manage on my own, I couldn't allow her to kick me out of her house. It was the only place where they had magic books. I'd already visited the city library and there weren't any. So, I began to study secretly. When she wasn't looking, I'd read passages from one of her books, and then when I left for work, I'd set aside time to practice what I'd learned. Although I gave a general overview of all sorts of topics, what caught my attention most was everything related to the world of dreams, ghosts, and human minds. That's why the first exercises I did were those that allowed you to expand your vision until what's hidden becomes evident. So you see things others can't. You never explained the details of that to me. Dareth seemed more than excited. Yeah, well, I see things like ghosts or spirits, beings that inhabit alternate dimensions. The truth is, it's not that good or pretty. Because when they realize you can see them, they begin to chase you to get your attention and convince you to do what they want. For some, it's just a harmless game. Others have genuinely bad intentions. You have to be strong to resist their voices, and you have to have the skill to shut down and not see when necessary. It sounds dangerous when you say it like that, you. Relax, nothing bad ever happened to me, the moth reassured him. The city where I lived, thanks to Dana herself, was very clean of evil influences or anything that could cause harm, so I wasn't in danger with my experiments. What got me into trouble was something else. Besides seeing spirits, I learned something much more interesting but more complicated. The ability to enter the minds of others to see their thoughts and dreams. The book said that the victim of mind raids never realizes someone has entered their head, at least, that's what the first paragraph said, but I didn't read the entire chapter, just enough to get me started experimenting. Of course I needed a victim to test myself on, and I couldn't think of a better idea than to try it on my teacher. I never should have done that. If I had read the entire chapter, I would have learned that magic users, shamans, and knowledgeable people in the field can detect when others enter their minds. My teacher was furious, and it wasn't just because I had studied magic without her consent, it wasn't because I had run tests without taking precautions, it wasn't because I had snooped into her mind while she was sleeping defenselessly, it was because I saw her weird fetishes in her sleep. I remember that and I died of shame. Of course, she was also angry, ashamed, and without holding back her soul, she started shooting at me. The mess we left in her house was tremendous. In the end my last resort was to climb a huge black statue she had in her house. That statue represented the Lord of Shadows, a terrifying looking creature with 4 arms, 8 eyes, and many horns. That being was the god she worshipped. It was capable of destroying all her books, amulets, even burning the moss she loved to eat, but it would never touch that statue. So terrified and trembling I curled up in the chest of the Lord of Shadows, while Dana stalked me with her staff charged with energy. I suspect she was trying to calculate the perfect trajectory to attack me without damaging the statue. At that point I had no escape, so in a desperate act, one begged this god in whom I did not believe to help me, and I swear he answered. In my head I heard some words. Leave him alone, he's not dangerous, what's dangerous is his ignorance. Apparently my teacher heard the same thing as me because she lowered her staff, and although she was still upset, she said. Okay, if it's her wish, then I'll grant it. Congratulations, snack. I don't know how you did it, but you won her favor, and now I'll teach you magic. Those were my formal beginnings in learning magic. Despite her gentle demeanor, when it came to being a teacher, Dana was very strict, making me read tons of books and practice spells, until I was exhausted. Either that, or it was her way of getting back at me for snooping in her dreams. In fact, the lessons about the spirit world were the first ones we covered, and the risks of wandering through the dream realm were one of the first things I had to learn. And here I must emphasize that according to Dana, I had an innate talent for handling these things, that my ease in entering the world of dreams was terrifying, because something that normally took months of learning I could achieve in a couple of weeks. Even in very early stages of my training, I was already able to slightly modify a person's mental dream world. That is something very difficult, not all people are capable of achieving it. And those who do take years to reach that level of control. But my special talent was only in that subject. For other things I was pretty average, even slow, like attack spells. Those magic daggers and flashes of light I can create are very basic things that don't contribute much offensively, but hey, that's what I could do. However, Dana said, I had a lot of potential, much more than any other apprentice she'd ever had, because I was the offspring of a high being. Do you remember who first called me that, Dareth? Grimm said it too, a while back. As far as I understand, a high being is a creature with such extraordinary power that they're legendary, some even comparable to a god. Theoretically, I possess that kind of power. If I wanted to, I could become the king of a country or a praised and venerated being. Although she said those things, it never seemed very credible to me. I mean, look at me. When people see me, they think more of embracing me than fearing me. Although I never believed her, Dana, she kept insisting that I was a powerful being and that power manifested itself in my ability with magic. But even so, although it's been a few years since I've been with my teacher, it's not as if I'm that strong now. Of course, it takes a sorcerer years to perfect and accumulate magic, and since my life is supposedly going to be extraordinarily long, I'll have plenty of time to become stronger. What do you think, Dareth? Yes, I think it could be true. What? Really? In my time as a guard I saw many incredible things. The smallest insects could be the most dangerous. That's why I normally don't judge anyone by their appearance. And if your teacher said you could become a king, well, you should believe her. For a reason she was your teacher. I mean, she had years of experience. Yes, but it's hard to believe it when your whole life you've been a prey living in hiding. Even today, I haven't managed to awaken that supposed power I have inside. I wish I had it, then I could. Well, let's not talk about that. He sighed deeply before continuing. I suppose it's because of that famous power I carry inside that Dana was always so distant and cautious with me. She was never particularly affectionate. She was kind, yes, but it was a cold kindness. I couldn't blame her for anything either. I mean, she picked me up from the street and took care of me for weeks without expecting anything in return. Of course, then I started working to contribute to the house, but it was so I wouldn't feel like a lazy bum. I stayed with her for about 3 years. They were 3 long years full of accidents and lessons. I think I matured a lot living with her, not only in the matter of magic. Dana also gave me quite a few lessons about the world, advice on how to avoid getting into trouble, how to deal with the different species of insects in wild environments, to respect everyone, and in particular she told me about her god, the Lord of Shadows. According to her, the deity saw something in me, and that's why she spared my life, even though those of my lineage were her enemies. No, perhaps saying enemies was too much, simply those of my kind are her absolute opposite, and that's why all her followers distrust my people. In the end, despite everything, I think Dana grew to love me a little. I never did anything to make her really hate me, and it's not my fault I'm who I am, is it? I wasn't even raised by my parents, so I didn't know about this ancient enmity between our peoples either. I didn't know anything about the world. Still, people change, circumstances change us, which is why my teacher made me make a promise on the day we said goodbye. That I would never hurt a child of the shadows. The truth is, it was an easy promise to keep since I have never encountered one of these children of the shadow since then, and things remained that way until I arrived in this realm. Well, here we are, in this place plagued by mindless beasts, where all the sane people are dead, and where a strange disease ravages everyone. One day I arrive here and what I find is a huge statue of a moth like me and a bunch of ghosts crying over a promise of power that cost them their lives. Do you see ghosts here? Dareth asked, alarmed. Yes, it's full, but not only here, throughout our entire journey I've seen them, and hearing their wails has given me an idea of what happened here. She caused it, the goddess that this statue represents. He pointed at the image. She did all this, and supposedly I have that same power. Now I understand why my teacher rejected me so much. Am I really like her? No. The usually calm Dareth screamed so loudly that the moth jumped in surprise. You're not like her. You're both different. If you don't want to do all these things, you don't have to. You want to live a peaceful life, right? You're not interested in being a king or god or anything. You're a good person, Bocadillo. We've been through so much together. You've supported me through everything. That's why I trust you. That's why we're friends. My friend would never be a bad person. Dareth Snack's eyes were wet with tears. The butterfly hugged the little ball of fur, who curled up, moved by the blind trust her friend had placed in her. She was truly happy to have met a person like him. How about we go now? He released the moth from his embrace. Let's see if we can find a place where ghosts won't haunt you. Yes, let's go. The end of the story. Bocadillo and Dareth lived many adventures and dangers, each with a different goal, but united by necessity, and from that necessity, a genuine friendship and trust arose, the kind that lasts a lifetime. But like everything else, their journey together one day came to an end, and Sandwich had to leave. Until that moment, Dareth didn't know it, but his little companion had a mission to fulfill, one he'd never told him about, and the moth decided it might be time to do it. Experience had helped him get to know this butterfly well. She was one of the most open-minded people he knew, and perhaps one of the most understanding. She wasn't fazed by the oddities she might encounter along the way. That's why it seemed appropriate to tell him about her motivation, a little secret he'd closely guarded and that few, if any, had the privilege of knowing. It was the fear of rejection that had led him to never speak about it, but he trusted Dareth so much and cared for him that he was willing to share this piece of his past with him. So now they both walked through the tunnels of the Withered Kingdom heading for the exit. In all the time we've been together, I think I've practically told you my life story, the moth commented. Well, the truth is yes, and you've had a very interesting life, I must say. I'm fascinating. But leaving that aside, I don't think I ever told you that after leaving Grimm's company, I saw him again. What? Really? You're reunited with your family? That's great. Dareth was almost jumping up and down with joy. Oh Dareth, he sighed, I don't think this is something to be so happy about. That's not a story that has a happy ending. What? Why not? Weren't they happy to see you? They were almost like family to you. Yes, they were, but it was complicated, very complicated. I have already told you many of the adventures I lived after the 2 years I spent with my teacher. There were many dangers and quite hard situations, but thanks to everything I had learned I was able to get ahead to the point of considering myself self-sufficient. But as the years passed and I gained experience, I missed the circus where I grew up more and more. I longed to see Grimm again, Brum, Divine not so much, but above all I missed Scarlet. But seeing them again seemed like an increasingly impossible dream. They lived in a traveling circus. It wasn't a specific place I could return to, their tours weren't regular. They could be in any city, and tracking them down was an odyssey. Finding them would practically be a matter of luck, but sometimes luck prevails. So it was that one day, upon arriving in a new city, I came across a certain sign with faces that seemed very familiar. The Grimm troupe was performing there. You can't imagine my excitement when I discovered this. I immediately headed to the circus, eager to see them all again, and although I wasn't expecting a banquet or a lavish reception, I at least assumed they'd be happy to see me. But nothing was as I expected, starting with the strange things I saw as I approached the tent. The magical arts I trained with Dano awakened my vision for the supernatural. Apparently, that was a talent I always had, but as I trained, it developed, making it possible for me to see ghosts, dreams, thoughts, and energies. When I arrived at the circus, I was terrified by the flashes of red essence floating everywhere. Oh, judging by your face, I can tell you don't understand that expression. Let's see, what I mean is that the circus was surrounded by negative energy, a chilling sensation very similar to that left by places where many people have died, but this wasn't a war zone, it was a circus, a place made for laughter and enjoyment. I found it hard to believe this kind of energy existed. Had it always been there? How come I never felt anything strange? It's true that I couldn't see these red flashes before, but even people without magical talent can feel a certain unease upon arriving in certain places, and these sensations are even stronger when you have to live there for long periods of time. I assumed that because I arrived so young, I had gotten used to this energy, but as I traveled through distant lands, I noticed the difference. To tell you the truth, Dareth, I was scared. Those energies are always a bad sign. But how could the circus, my home, be a dangerous place? I didn't understand. Confusion and curiosity ultimately led me to enter, even though my entire body was shaking with fear. I don't know how I didn't die of terror when the master appeared before me in a blaze of flames. When I was little, that action seemed like an interesting trick to me, a magician's illusion, but now with what I knew and saw, it was clear to me that it wasn't a trick. Grimm had transported himself from another place using that negative energy. In fact, he was the source of that almost demonic power. The teacher noticed my stupor, although he didn't react too much to it. Wow, you can appreciate it. I expected nothing less from a tall being, even if it's a pocket one. Then he bowed to me. Welcome, prodigal son, bearer of dreams. Have you come to reclaim this land of nightmares? Nightmare realm? What? You know more than before but still not enough, you don't have the power either, you can't end the endless song. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have put my hopes in you. Teacher, what? No matter. Come, dance with us, rejoice in the memories, greet your loved ones, and then depart for the faraway places. This is not your home, but you can always return. But I must give you one warning. Do not enter the nightmares of the people here. And then, as was his custom, he vanished in a flash. I was perplexed and confused. It was always difficult to understand what the teacher meant, but this time his message was more enigmatic than usual. There were too many metaphors, almost as if he wanted to avoid saying anything directly. I was particularly struck by the phrase, "Don't enter the nightmares of the people here." Up until that moment, I had never made the distinction between dreams and nightmares. Aina had taught me how to enter dreams, but she never told me that a nightmare had a completely different nature and was governed by its own rules. Perhaps she didn't even know it. This is information that very few people know, and I ended up discovering it the hard way. My visit to my old home was peaceful. I was pleased to discover that most of the people I knew still worked there and remembered me. They were also happy to see me, or at least that's what their tone of voice indicated, because the eternal masks they wore prevented me from seeing their true facial expressions. When I was little I didn't question that point. I always thought that masks were a symbol of belonging to the circus. It never occurred to me that they had another function, like hiding the expression of eternal suffering, that the creatures in the place had, because with all the negative energy that surrounded them, it was impossible for them to be happy. Yes, at that moment, with my new vision I could see it, each and every one of the artists were surrounded by this red essence, in fact, it imprisoned them. I could clearly see ropes of energy around their necks, like the ropes that an enslaved beast would have. Then I realized that everything I believed was a lie. That circus was not a happy family of artists who loved and supported each other, it was a demonic cult disguised as a circus. All the bugs were victims of Grimm, their leader, who oppressed them and forced them to follow him. Terror flooded through me when I realized, and the first thing I thought of was Scarlet. She was an innocent little girl, knowing nothing about all this. Was she also her father's slave? I flew everywhere looking for her, but the truth is, she found me first. As she often did before, she threw herself at me and hugged me, happy to see me again. I felt a tremendous relief to see that she didn't have this noose of essence around her neck, she was still free and happy, but there was something else that worried me. I hadn't seen her for several years, and in all that time she hadn't grown at all. It was as if time had stopped for her. It was then that I realized that second fact. In this circus, time didn't pass, everyone was frozen, cursed. Even if Scarlet wasn't a slave of the master, the curse of the place prevented her from growing. It just raised some questions for me. Why wasn't I affected by the curse? Why did I grow up? I was a child when I joined the circus, but I never became a slave or anything. Perhaps those were the implications of being a higher being, having some kind of power that protected you from curses. Honestly, it wasn't that far from the truth. Anyway, seeing all the circus members imprisoned by the ringmaster filled me with terror, but knowing that Scarlet was okay, at least for now, gave me hope. Maybe I could still save her, get her out of that horrible circus, and by being away, she could grow a little. I was willing to take her with me and raise her. I really like children, but as soon as I tried to get her out of the circus she fainted. Brum picked her up outside the tent, calmed me down, and told me that everything would be okay, that since I hadn't been away from the influence of the nightmare heart much time had passed, nothing was wrong, but that the master shouldn't find out about this. He promised to keep quiet to protect me, but he recommended that I leave the circus once and for all. But I couldn't just leave like that. I needed answers. I needed to free Scarlet, and I let Brum know. I think he underestimated me. Unlike the master, he didn't realize I could use magic now, so he chose to deliver an ambiguous, half-indecipherable message that gave me few clues as to what was going on. The Lord of Nightmares is our jailer, and there is nothing you can do about it. Yeah, that message didn't say much, but it said enough. It wasn't hard for me to associate nightmares with dreams, at least to me, nightmares were just bad dreams. And when she said Lord of Nightmares, I thought she was referring to Grimm, pointing to him as the head of this whole demonic cult. So that was my new goal. To get into Grimm's dreams, to find a way to free Scarlet. I never imagined what I'd find when I went in there. Since I'm small and quiet, it wasn't difficult for me to sneak into Grimm's bedroom, where I found him, hanging upside down from a piece of wood. Does this seem strange to you, Dareth? I'm guessing you don't know much about bats. They sleep like that, wrapped in their wings. It's quite funny, I must say. Anyway, the thing is, just as I had learned, I touched my master's body, opened my wings and entered. The interior of his dream was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. People usually dream of places they know or have read about, anything they can reproduce in their head, because there's some memory of it, but this place, I'd never seen anything like it, and I'd been traveling all over the place for years. It was horrifying, filled with red fire, a stone floor, and horrible chilling eyes that floated everywhere and seemed to pierce you to the very soul. The air there was suffocating, as if made of dust, my skin prickled, and the atmosphere was oppressive. But worst of all was the fear it provoked. It was so terrifying that every hair on my body stood on end. Don't laugh, Dareth, yes, I look like a walking fluff, but that detail isn't important. Somehow I overcame my fear and advanced with timid steps through that dreamlike territory. It distressed me to think that Grimm had been in his head to dream such a place, but this dream world was not Grimm's creation, it was the work of a being much older than him. The heartbeat resonated in the air, the echo of each palpitation invaded every corner and made me shudder. Then I looked up and noticed the enormous bulb hanging above, then it opened and out came a red bat. At first I thought it was a Grimm, but I was wrong. It was a different bat, not only because of its color, its ears were longer, its gaze more terrifying, and its aura more cruel. Yes, that was the best way to define it. It was a creature made of evil and desires for destruction, whose great delight was seeing others suffer. Well, what do we have here?" he said as he emerged from the bulb and opened his wings. "The offspring of a tall being, what a marvel, what a delight, devouring you will be beautiful." And he attacked me, and Snack's voice cracked, overcome by his emotions. "I'm sorry, Dareth, remembering that hurts me a lot. You don't need to say anything else if you don't want to." "Yes, I want to, but fear paralyzes me. Remembering that battle terrifies me." "Wait. You fought him?" The butterfly looked at him in disbelief. "It wasn't the real world, we were in the dream world. The magic you've seen me perform here is nothing compared to what I'm capable of in dreams. In dreamland, I can modify the environment to my liking, build towers, create illusions, make powerful explosions capable of destroying everything in their path, but even then, I was no match for that bat. The power of that monster far surpassed mine. Every modification I made to the environment he crushed, every shot I threw at him he deflected with a flare, no matter what tricks I used, he destroyed every attempt I made to defend myself, and what's worse, he was just playing. If he had wanted to, he could have incinerated me from the first instant. All my strength wasn't even enough to give him a measly scratch, he was only delaying my death to entertain himself and to extract the greatest amount of energy from my fear, because that was his food, he was the Nightmare King. I don't know how long I was fighting there, at least to me it seemed like an eternity. I only remember that it was horrible, every second was desperate, suffocating, the anguish grew with every moment as I saw that everything I tried was useless, their power was too much for me, and finally the moment came when I lost hope, I resigned myself to my death. The moment I gave up, I was no longer interesting to the bat, so it stopped playing games and proceeded to kill me, but obviously to get some more fun out of it, it would do it as slowly as possible. Then it pinned me to the ground and dug one of its claws into my left eye. Immediately, the skin on my face began to burn, causing unbearable pain. It was excruciating agony, the worst pain I'd ever suffered in my life. I tore my throat out, screaming and begging for mercy, and of course, that was what he enjoyed most. That was going to be my end, but something distracted the Nightmare King and made him take his hands off me for a few moments. I was stunned and in pain, unable to react or correctly perceive my surroundings. I didn't know what happened, I only know that in my pain I felt firm hands that took me and carried me away, and then I woke up in the real world. Yes, more than once I was part of some unpleasant dream with bad results, but every time I woke up all the pain and fear went away, vanished into nothingness, but this time it wasn't like that. I opened my eyes and felt as scared as I was in pain. In fact, my face was burning so much that a couple of tears escaped. Before I could do anything, someone placed a wet cloth on my face, somewhat relieving my discomfort. That dream, that nightmare transcended reality, that demon really burned my face. What? How can that be? Do dreams affect reality? Not always, in fact normally, although a magician could make you have a very bad time in a nightmare, when you wake up everything is over and nothing has happened, but there are beings of extraordinary power that break the norm, that what they do to you in the dream affects you in real life, and who I faced was not just any being, he was not a high-level magician, and he was more than just a high being, he was a god. A god. The horrible and ruthless god who left my face like this. Bocadillo proceeded to remove the half-mask he was wearing, revealing the hidden part of his face which was disfigured, with the exposed skin a dark and wrinkled tone, destroying the adorable image he usually projected. So that's why you always wear a mask. Yes, I don't like looking in the mirror and seeing this. He immediately put his mask back on, plus the mask was a gift from my master. When I was finally able to overcome the pain and pay attention to my surroundings, I found the master looking at me sadly. I told you not to enter our nightmares. It was a miracle I was able to save your life. Master, you saved me. But why? Scarlet would have been hurt to lose her toy. I must say that Grimm has never been very honest with his feelings. I am absolutely sure that he actually saved me because he himself cares for me, but he would never admit it. But I thought that you were evil, that you had everyone here enslaved because that nightmare essence came from you. I am a slave too, one barely more important than the others. I am the messenger of the Nightmare King, the god you faced. It is my duty to exercise his will, to capture creatures, to harvest fear, to inflict pain and to suffer for it. Master, is this true? Are you suffering because of what you do? Why don't you flee the circus then? Why don't you free everyone and dismantle this cult? It's useless. He turned his back on me and lowered his head. He looked devastated. You can't escape nightmares. They're everywhere and nowhere. When you close your eyes, he's there, ready to destroy your soul and your hopes. So? We are doomed. Why, Scarlet? Not yet, but soon. But she still has hope. She could. There is no hope. Even if I could set her free, I would be forced to bear more offspring for Lord Nightmare, and even if I set them free, abandoning children to their fate is not saving them, and even if I refuse to take them from their mother's arms, this nefarious god will take his revenge on them. There is no hope for anyone. Grimm hugged himself and began to shake. I'd never seen him like this in my life, so vulnerable, broken and elegant. Then he turned to me, regaining his composure. It was foolish of me to think someone like you would have a chance. Yes, very foolish. Your power was enough to oppose the influence of the nightmare, but not to defeat it. Only someone outside the company can end everything, but that someone isn't you after all. A sandwich will always be a sandwich. And then he laughed, but it was a very sad laugh, because the tears kept coming. The song will last forever, an eternity of misery and slavery, but you are still free. Fly away, Batana, fly away for all of us who cannot follow you alone here. And then he gave me the scarlet mask I wear. Now you always wanted one, right? Don't forget us. I took the mask he offered me with trembling hands and put it on. It smelled of sulfur, but it had the warmth of the master, because he handcrafted each of the masks worn by the people of his cult. I couldn't say anything else. I was too terrified and hurt to do so. I almost wanted to throw up from the anguish, and my face was still burning. With my nerves shattered, the only thing I could do was run away. I spread my wings and flew away without saying goodbye to anyone. All I wanted to do was get away from that demonic aura that permeated every corner of the circus. I didn't listen to anyone, I didn't pay attention to anyone, not even Brum when he yelled at me. I know an ending to this song. I was too upset to play the riddles. I was only able to keep flying higher and higher until I was too far away. When I managed to recover a few days later, I was finally able to accept everything that had happened and accept that it wasn't a dream, and to resign myself to the fact that my face would never look the same again, and that I would have to wear a mask, both to hide it and to protect it. He sighed sadly, placing a hand on the mask. Several years have passed, but remembering that still affects me. Bocadillo. But there's one thing that perhaps affects me more, something that bothers me to this day. What did Brum mean? In my terror, I didn't stop to listen. I'm sure he shouted at me. I know an ending to the song. I also know that they call the curse that haunts them a song. Did he know how to save the maestro and everyone in the circus? How different would things have been if I had listened? It still bothers my conscience to think about it. I wanted to go back to the circus to talk to Brum, but so far, I haven't run into them again. This almost sounds like a horror story, Dareth commented, not quite sure how to comfort his friend. Oh yeah, believe me, living this is. So what you came to these ruins to find was a way to save the circus people. Was that your real goal? Yes, whether it's a definitive way to break her bond with the Nightmare King or a power that allows me to defeat him myself. Supposedly I could be a king if I wanted to, but that doesn't interest me. All I want is to save my sister Scarlet, and if to do that I have to become a god, so be it. He said this with absolute determination, but all his confidence vanished in a second. But until now, no matter how much I've practiced and studied, I still haven't been able to bring out that power that Dana said I had inside, that which would allow me to express my nature as a higher being. Sometimes I lose hope and think that nothing makes sense anymore, but then I get up and keep trying. One day I will be powerful, and one day I will meet them again, I'm sure of that, in any case I have all eternity to do it. Without warning, Dareth hugged Bocadillo, seeking to give him the warmth and support he needed at that moment. The little moth, somewhat clumsily, responded to his hug and snuggled into his chest. Don't worry, Bocadillo, I'm sure you'll achieve everything you set out to do. For some years, the white moth continued wandering around the world, looking for the answers to his questions and the solution to his problems. He met many people, many cities and creatures, becoming an experienced adventurer. He gained friends and experiences, as well as unforgettable memories and adventures. He never forgot to enjoy his life, but he never lost sight of his goal. One day, he arrived at a prosperous city where a poster caught his attention, promoting a circus act and posing in all their splendor were two bats. One look was enough for him to recognize Grimm, those eyes and that elegance were unmistakable, but what truly impacted him was the young woman at his side. Had Scarlet grown up? He didn't think twice, he flew at full speed to the circus and immediately noticed all the differences there were. He didn't recognize any of the mixed breed bugs that worked there, and the essence of the nightmare was nowhere to be seen, it was as if it had completely disappeared. Had he been confused and this was another circus run by a bat? The chances of this were very low, and the resemblance of the circus artist to his master was too great. He managed to sneak into the compound and speak to the teacher, he had no doubt it was him, but the teacher didn't seem to recognize him. "Teacher, don't you remember me? It's me. Sandwich. DFFF, what a funny name. You put it on me. Daddy? Who are you talking to?" A little girl's voice announced her arrival in the room. What a pretty white moth. Scarlet. He immediately flew up, practically landing right in the girl's face. "Look at me. Don't you recognize me? I'm Snack. Your playmate. We've known each other since we were larvae." "Daddy, is he a friend of yours?" she asked nervously. "I don't know, I don't remember." "What do you mean, you don't remember me? You took me in when I was a larva. You raised me with Brum. Where's Brum? Where's Divine? Where's everyone?" "Everyone? Who is everyone?" Then Grimm had an idea. "Could it be possible that you're someone from that past we can't remember? Can't you remember? Scarlet and I lost our memories a couple of years ago, we don't know who we are, our origins, maybe you can tell us where we come from, or if we have families." Grimm looked at him hopefully. "Family? Oh no," the moth landed and collapsed on the ground which it began to beat with its tiny hands. "It can't be. No. 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 So long searching and I couldn't save them, they have freed themselves from the Nightmare King, but the price to pay has been very high." From that day on, Bocadillo achieved a new goal. Recovering the memories of his loved ones. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching, if you enjoyed this video please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day, bye.